Hi, Rabbi.
Wherever you are, long time. Okay, long time. So glad to be back and starting Shiur again. Okay, so we're gonna be tackling an interesting. I'm not sure if you watched the introduction, but we're gonna be tackling, excuse me, an interesting sugya. It's really one of the 613 mitzvot, and this is the mitzvah of Avielus. Usually, when we talk about Avielus, we don't preface it with the mitzvah. We usually say that there's the like halachos of Avielus, or the laws of I don't know. Very rarely do you see the mitzvah of Avielus. I think that's because most people don't maintain that there is one of the 613 mitzvos is Avielus, and I think that it's novel just to approach the sugya this way as one of the 613 mitzvos. So I think that's going to be where we're going to start making it a little interesting. So let's look at the Makoros here, and we'll go over the sources along with the questions, and then we'll get to our svara here and try to understand the mitzvah of Avielus. Okay, so if we look at the first source, it's pretty simple. It says that there's a mitzvah to mourn our relatives. Okay, so now what's interesting we brought up is that the Rambam doesn't as he usually does when he says that there's a mitzvah to do something. Here he does not say that there's a mitzvah in the same way as all other mitzvahs. He doesn't say that there's a mitzvah to mourn, as it says. Shneimar, mourn. I don't know, it doesn't say something like. There's nothing like that. The posuk doesn't have that. The posuk talks about Aaron and the whole debate between Aaron and Moshe when Aaron's sons died. So there was a debate between them if Aaron and his son should eat from the kodesh, from meat that was kodesh, because they were in aninos at the time. So that's where the Rambam quotes it from and says, you see that they were in some sort of process of mourning, and therefore we can tell that there's a mitzvah aseh to mourn. There's one of the 613 mitzvahs is to mourn. So it begs the question: what makes this mitzvah any different than all the other mitzvahs? Why doesn't God say mourn? Right? If there's a mitzvah to mourn, where is the posuk that says to mourn? Where is it that we're getting? And we see there's people that are a lot greater than us that ask this question. They don't really ask the question. They use it as a challenge to the Rambam and say, if it doesn't say to mourn, then there's no mitzvah to mourn. Right? That's it. This is not a mitzvah to mourn. Okay. Then it gets much more interesting because the Rambam is in certain areas is very limited in the words that he uses. And here, when the Rambam introduces, when the Rambam introduces these halachos, and again, in every section of the Rambam, he has an introduction. It's called, we like to call it the keter. Some people call it, it says here, Hagdama, the introduction. And he lists the mitzvos aseh and the mitzvos los aseh that he's going to cover in that section. It's usually 4 or 5 words. That's it. He usually says there's like 6 mitzvos aseh and 1 mitzvos los aseh, and that's the extent of what he says. And then he lists them. He says you have to pray and you have to say Shema twice a day, and that's usually it. It's very short. Here, the Rambam is so verbose. He goes on and on and on. It's like apologetics. Well, watch what he says here. He says that there's 4 mitzvahs that he's going to be talking about, 1 mitzvah aseh and 3 mitzvahs los aseh. And here's what they are. And then the first one, he says, to mourn our relatives. That's where he should have stopped. Anywhere else in the Mishnah Torah, that's where the Rambam stops. He does not go on. That's it. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to mourn your relatives, as he says here. Mitzvahs aseh lisavel akrovim. That's all he says, and then he goes on with the pasuk. Then there's more details in the introduction. You don't need more. But look what he does. He says, he goes on and he says like this. Even cohanum become tumah and mourn over their relatives. Okay, that's a small detail. Why do I need to know that in introduction? And just so you know that if your relative was executed by Beis Din, right, which we know barely ever happens, so you don't sit shiur for them. You don't mourn them. Okay, good to know, right? That's the essence of the essence of the essence of this mitzvah. And the Rambam says, let me tell you why I needed to tell you that. The reason why I had to tell you that is because the Mishnah Torah is structured in 14 different books. Okay, it's called the Yad Chazakah, the Rambam called it. He didn't call it the Mishnah Torah, he called it the Yad Chazakah, the strong hand. Yad, its gematria, its numerical value is 14 different books. What the Rambam did was he categorized halacha in those 14 books. So he took all the halachos, everything, not just the ones that are relevant today, but all the halachos, and then he split all the halachos into 14 different categories. And so when certain halachos are found in a certain book, there's a reason why they're in one of those 14 books, right? So there's nothing out of place. If something seems out of place to you, then there's a reason for that, why the Rambam put it there, and that reason is because the Rambam felt that those halachos are really an aspect of that thing. So I'll give you an example. The Rambam puts the laws of tefillah in Sefer Ahava, right? In the book of love. Why? Because it's a sign of love to Hashem that every single day I talk to him, my love towards Hashem. Okay, so that's why it's called Sefer Ahava. Ahava is a sort of like a dedication that you have. Okay, I get that. That makes sense. The laws of mezuzah are also in Sefer Ahava. So now you have to ask yourself, how is mezuzah a showing of dedication? That itself is a question. Why in the Rambam's mind did he put mezuzah in Sefer Ahava? Tefillah, I understand that I got to get up early in the morning, I got to find time in the afternoon, and before I go to sleep, I have to make sure that I daven Ma'ariv. So that's a show of commitment. That I get. Putting something on my door one time, my entire life. If I live in one house my entire life, that's Ava, that's Ava. So how does that work? And when the Rambam discusses Avas Hashem, it's not even in Sefer Ava. So that's a whole other question. Fine, I get that. Okay, so here the Rambam goes on and says, the reason why the laws of mourning are found in Sefer Shoftim, which is a book about judges, right? The Sanhedrin, book about testimony, about Eidos. So the reason why it's there is because of this one halacha, that if your friend is mourning, right? If your relative is mourning, and your relative is mourning because your relative that died was executed by Beis Din, so you don't mourn over that person. And therefore we're going to take all of Hilchos Eivel, everything, and we're going to switch it from one book in the Mishnah Torah to another book in the Mishnah Torah, says the Rambam. Okay, I mean, that's like a little strange in my eyes, at least. I don't know. Okay, so it opens up a whole slew of questions for me. Right? Why did the Rambam write so much? Why did the Rambam include that even a Cohen has to mourn? Okay, it's a detail, right? Why the Rambam feels important for us to know why he included Hilchos Eivel in Sefer Shoftim, and if it wasn't in Shoftim, so then where should it have been? Right? Where is the more natural place for Hilchos Eivel? Where would we have put it? Okay, so those are some quick opening questions that we have. Okay, everybody good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, then we have the minyan ha-mitzvos. Okay, so this is in the beginning of the Mishnah Torah. The minyan ha-mitzvos. So the Rambam says. This is not really. This is just an explanation of what Sefer Shoftim is all about, and to show you how strange it is that Hilchos Eivel is found here. So the Rambam says that here's all the halachos of Sanhedrin, like mitzvos Beis Din and Kabbalas Eidos, right? Like to accept who Beis Din executes, and the accepting of testimony, and the din of a king, and when he goes out to war. So that's what this Sefer is all about, according to the Rambam. And therefore, it's strange that the Rambam puts the laws of mourning here, which really don't have to do with anything of that. And then the Rambam explains he does it because there's this idea of the people that are executed by Beis Din, we don't mourn. Okay. If all of that wasn't strange enough, this is where I think is really the strangest part of the Rambam here. When you look up this mitzvah in the Sefer Mitzvos, right? Sefer Mitzvos, again, a list of the 613 mitzvos according to the Rambam. Okay, great. Okay, so when you look up this list from the Sefer Mitzvos, you expect to find a mitzvah to mourn. Just like the Rambam said, mitzvahs aselis avel al krovim. There's one of the 613 mitzvos is to mourn our relatives that have passed away. Okay. The Rambam doesn't say that. That's not the mitzvah. Ha-mitzvah halam zayin, the 37th mitzvah, u'shitzivanu sheyitamu ha-cohanum l'krovim haniskarim b'Torah. The mitzvah really, if you would say, what's this mitzvah that you're learning about today? So you'd say the title on the top of the Makoros here is incorrect. This isn't about Avielus. The mitzvah is actually for cohanim to become tumah for one of their relatives. That's the mitzvah, right? In other words, if you were studying the 613 mitzvos and you came up to number 37, which that's how I got to this. So, okay, let's go through the 613 mitzvos, and you get to the 37th mitzvah. You expect this to be now. There must be a special mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvos, for cohanim to become tumah. That's just exactly what he writes. He says the 37th mitzvah is command for cohanim to become tumah on their relatives. But that's not the mitzvah. There is no such mitzvah. That's not one of the 613 mitzvahs. The Rambam says that's the mitzvah, but that's not true. According to the Rambam, it's not true. If you then go to the Mishnah Torah, okay, and we looked it up, we saw in his introduction, he says that there's a mitzvah saseh lis avel akrovim, and he says so much so that a Cohen has to become tumah. He doesn't say the mitzvah is for a Cohen to become tumah. So why does the Rambam why does he write this? It's not true. It's just not true. There's no mitzvah like this. There's a halacha. There's a difference between one of the 613 mitzvos and the halacha. There is a halacha that's true, that cohanim have to become tumah for one of their relatives that pass away. They have to go to the funeral. They have to go to the cemetery to bury them. A Cohen cannot say, listen, I'm a Cohen. I'll hire the Chevra Kadisha to do this. I don't have to go to the funeral. I don't have to get involved in the burial. You can't do that as a Cohen. You have to become tumah. That is true. That's a halacha. And obviously it has to be stated, because if it wasn't stated, we would naturally assume that the prohibition for a Cohen to come in contact with the dead body is what stands above everything else. So for the fact that the Cohen has to become tumah, okay, I get that that's a halacha. But to call that the mitzvah, it's not true. So then later here, the Rambam says, in the Sefer Mitzvah still, he says, the zeh ba'atzmo hu mitzvos avel. So then he says something strange. He says, this mitzvah, right? So he says, this mitzvah, zeh ba'atzmo, this mitzvah is the mitzvah of avel. It is the mitzvah of mourning. That's what this mitzvah is. Okay, so pick one. If it's the mitzvah of mourning, so right, the 37th mitzvah of the Torah is to mourn. If the mitzvah is for cohanim to become tumah, so then say it's the mitzvah to become tumah. What does that mean that this mitzvah is the mitzvah of Avel? What does that mean? So he says, Kolomar ki kol ish Yisrael chayav le'savel akrovav, because this really tells us that all Jewish people have to be misavel, they have to mourn over their relatives. Okay, right? So, and then he says, L'chazei chiyuv zeh bir also b'kohen shu muzar tumah. So in order to show how strong this mitzvah is, I don't know why this mitzvah we have to show it strong. Why all of a sudden this mitzvah we have to show it strong? Shema we had no problem with, right? The ketores we had no issue with giving spices, but here we have to be. How do we show how strong this mitzvah is? Because we go ahead and say that even a Cohen has to violate a prohibition in the Torah to go ahead and mourn. Okay. Right, that's the as it is. He says, because we're worried about, the Rambam says, if the Cohen doesn't mourn his relatives, maybe other people will look at it and say, mourning's not that important. If mourning was so important, then cohanum would go. I don't know if that's what people would say. I think people would say the opposite. They would say, oh, the Cohen's not mourning because he never comes to the funerals. He's not allowed. We never see a Cohen at a funeral, right? He never shows up. Right, because he's prohibited. So so his own relatives, he's also not allowed to go. That's the general assumption I think would be there. I don't know, it's very strange. So okay, good. Okay, and no questions here. We're all set so far. Everything's fine. Okay, great, fine. Okay, going on. The Kesef Mishna is really not happy with this in the Rambam. Man, he looks at this. He says this is very strange. Okay, so we're not going to read it inside. It's a very long Kesef Mishna. If you want to see, go to the introductory share. We read it there. So he says that there's a famous debate. A big debate. We're going to see it hinted at Rabbeinu Yonah a little later. But big debate whether or not Avielus, like sitting shiva, is a din daraisa or not. That's a big debate. Whether or not sitting shiva is daraisa or not. According to the Rif and the Rambam and the Ramban, so you have a mitzvah to mourn. It's not all 7 days. Nobody really holds that all 7 days of daraisa, but you do have this idea of mourning. Okay, good, fine. That's that you do have. But you also have Rishonim that maintain that it's darabanan Avielus. Okay, so that's so you have that debate, and it's important to note that debate that when the Rambam goes ahead and says it's one of the 613 mitzvos, he's not just going out on a limb and saying it's one of the 613 mitzvos. He's saying that he's taking daraisa to an even stronger level. He's not even saying it's just a Torah din here. Not only is this not their abundance from the Torah, it's actually one of the 613 mitzvos. So guys, okay, fine, but take a step back here. When the Rambam's source for the fact that there is one of the 613 mitzvos is to mourn, his source comes from Aaron, okay? And Aaron was not going to eat from the korban, and a whole big debate happened between Aaron and, okay, but Aaron wasn't an Avel. It's important to note. Aaron was not an Avel, okay? Aaron was an Onen, right? So how does the Rambam even learn anything from that pasuk, right? Even if you want to say, look, the whole story wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for some sort of halachic concept occurring there. And therefore, we can extrapolate that there was a mitzvah, because otherwise, what would Aaron be being arguing with Moshe about, right? But in truth, Aaron was an Onen. An Onen is somebody from the time of death until burial. That's called an Onen. An Avel is somebody from burial until, I don't know when, the end of Shiva, the end of the first day, depending on where we're going to go with this, okay? But to learn Avielus from Aaron is very difficult. Not only that, says the Kesef Mishna, he says, Avielus and becoming tumah are two separate things. I can become tumah and never be an Avel, and I can be an Avel and really never become tumah. The two have nothing to do with each other. So when the Rambam talks about, hey, look, you see, it says that Aaron has to become tumah. Aaron had to become tumah because there's a mitzvah to be misavel krobim. Wait a minute, hold on a second. Those are two separate things. Just because the Cohen has to become tumah to bury his dead doesn't tell us that there's an obligation to mourn. What does one have anything to do with the other, says the Kesef Mishna. So he challenges the Rambam. He says, the Rambam, how could you say that the Rambam is correct here? The entire learning process of the Rambam here is very, very difficult to understand. Says because he's just wrong. He's wrong. His proofs don't make sense. The learning doesn't make sense. Nothing works here. Okay. Then a lot of people point to, hold on a second. It says that the Rambam holds that the first day, the Rambam, the Rif, the Ramban, hold that the first day of Avielus is from the Torah. That's the mitzvah, 1 day. But that 1 day also has to be the day of burial and the day of death. And so you got to bury the person and on the day that they died, and then you have a Torah obligation to mourn for them. But if those don't work out, if you're not burying on the day of death, then you don't have a daraisa, you don't have a mitzvah to mourn daraisa. And then everybody agrees that everything after that would be darabanan, and it was Moshe Rabbeinu that set it up. Okay, fine. Okay, but then you have in source number 7 here. You have this. Sorry, I didn't bring it up here. You have this posuk from Bereshis that when Yaakov died, right? It says V'yasa Aviv Avel Shivas Yomim. They did 7 days of mourning for him. So how did that happen? How did they do 7 days of mourning for Yaakov if it's not from the Torah? They had darabanans back in the times of Yaakov. How did that work? Okay, and wouldn't this be the perfect proof to say, see, Avielus is from the Torah, and not only that, but it's 7 days. Okay, nope. Okay, Rabbeinu Yonah brings up the rationale for those that say that mourning is a Torah obligation, because the posuk says, right, we're going to see it later, the pasuk says that it's a Yom HaMariros, right? Yom Mar, calls it a bitter day. The day of death is a bitter day. And that, he says, that's a Torah concept. So the fact that it's a bitter day tells us that there's an obligation. That's where they get this obligation of mourning from the Torah. It's sort of a reaction to that bitter day of death. Okay, fine. So then, but then there's a whole school of thought. Rabbeinu Tzarfat, right? The French scholars, right? There's the Balei Tosfos, Rashi, right? So they all hold. Even the first, there's no such thing as a Torah law of mourning. The whole thing doesn't work. There's nothing. Okay, maybe you could say aninus, right, from our own story, but you can't say that there's Avielus from the Torah, but rather it has to be midarabanan. Okay, because he says she'ein lashon aninus lashon Avielus echad. They're not one and the same. Okay, so that's so it can't be that, right? That's the debate that you have. Okay, fine. So okay, everybody good? Those are our sources for the questions. Okay, so let's get on to a svara here. Okay, first let's look at some extra sources here for a second, just to help us out. Okay, so first is the posuk that we talked about. Right, I'm going to turn your days of festivals into days of mourning. Right, not a good thing. Okay, and the pasuk ends. And then there'll be bitter days. The Radak explains the whole pasuk is repetitive. Why? Because the mourning of an individual, not just the national level of mourning, but the individual's day of mourning is a bitter day. Okay. Rashi says as follows. This is a Rashi in Nazir. Avielus derabanan. He says the ikar Avielus eino yom echad. Real Avielus is just one day. Okay, Kesef Mishna kiyom, like one day kiyomar. But the Rabbanan came along and tiknu Zion is like 7 days. The samchu akra. Where did the Rabbanan get along that it should be 7 days? From Yaakov, right? Yaakov had 7 days of mourning, so the Rabbanan said that's a great idea. Okay, then you have this famous Rambam. The Rambam says, "Kol mi she'eino misavel kamosh tzibur chachamim." Let's say somebody says, either I don't buy the Rambam's arguments, there's no real obligation of mourning, or I don't think there's a Torah obligation of mourning, I think it's just derabanan, or I don't even think that derabanan, this makes too much sense. So I'm not going to do any of this thing. I'm not a Cohen, I'm not going to tell him. So he says, he calls you achzar, he calls you cruel, and rather you should be scared and introspect and be choser b'tshuva. That's what Avielus is. Okay, so here's what I'd like to suggest. Based on this is my svara to explain the mitzvah, and then I'll try to show how the svara answers our questions. This is what I'd like to say. I think that there are two dinim to the mourning in the Torah. There's two aspects to mourning in the Torah. There's the obligation of certain maisim. We have obligations to do certain actions, and then there's a chalos. There's a status of mourning that attaches to all those that lost a close relative. And I think that's what we're going to find when we go through the halachos. If we keep those two things in mind, and I'll try to prove it through my answers. But I think that's what we find through the sources, that we see there's two things actually happening in this mitzvah. The first thing that's happening in this mitzvah is that we find that there's certain actions that the mourner is commanded to perform, right? And we're familiar with these. Okay, you're not allowed to leave the house. Most of them are losases. They're mostly prohibitions, right? Well, I wouldn't call them losases, sorry, because I don't want to get confused and think that there's more of the 613 mitzvos, but they're isurim. They're prohibitions. There's things you're not allowed to do. Okay, very few things that a mourner is actually obligated to do. Okay, but then even a separate aspect of this is that it's not just that the mourner finds himself in certain circumstances where he has to do certain actions. Okay, it's not just, I actually try to think, give me a second here to think of an example where that's true, where you just have a person that finds themselves in circumstances. A judge is a perfect thing. Every time a judge gets up to judge a case, so the dayan, the judge, is judging a case, and he has to do certain things. He has to give everybody a fair chance. There's a halachos that apply to a dayan. But it's not that the halachos apply to the dayan, as far as I know, because the dayan has a status. He doesn't have a new chalos every time he steps into the beis din, right? There's no chalos of a dayan. He happens to be the dayan there, but he doesn't have a status, and therefore their obligations stem from it. But the mourner, I think that there's a status, there's a chalos that comes to the mourner, okay? And therefore, there doesn't have to be. Our question is, why isn't there a direct posuk like you have with most mitzvos that command us to mourn? So I want to say that mourning's different from other Torah commands. Okay, that mourning is different in that sense. Okay, that instead of a Torah command to mourn, there's a status of mourning that attaches. The obligations that come to a mourner stem from that status. Okay, and that's why the Rambam doesn't just simply say, you have a mitzvah to mourn. You find yourself in the circumstances where a close relative of yours has passed away, therefore now you must mourn. It's more than that. The Rambam is going to talk about the fact that a Cohen, that the Cohen then gains another status. He has another chalos. He's not just a Cohen that week, but that Cohen then is also as a Cohen hamisabel. He's a Cohen that mourns, and that's a whole different status. Okay, and therefore the Rambam's going to have to write this in a manner which reflects the fact that there's more happening here than just the fact that this person has certain obligations. Okay, and I think that's the idea that we're seeing here. Okay. And when the Rambam, we asked the question, why the Rambam writes strangely that more than just as a mitzvah to mourn when he goes into the introduction, right? We talked about what book I'm in and the fact that the cohanum have to become tumah, not to say for a mitzvah's question, but the question of in the Mishnah Torah in the introduction to the halachos of Avielt and the keter. So the Rambam wrote the mitzvah. Now he wrote the mitzvah reflecting the various different expressions of this chalos, of this status. Okay, so for the average avel that has the chalos of an avel, so it's just the regular obligations that we're familiar with when it comes to hilchos avel. But with a Cohen, so now the Cohen has a special status. He has the special status of an avel that attaches to him. Okay, so you'll say, who cares? Okay, call it a status, call it whatever you want. But that status, when the Cohen is misavel, then the Cohen has to become tumah. That status is directing the Cohen to become tumah. Otherwise, what allows the Cohen to become tumah? What and I don't mean like obviously not philosophically, but I'm saying the mechanism. What is happening here that a Cohen who normally has a prohibition is normally not allowed to become tumah, all of a sudden is allowed is not only is allowed, must become tumah, right? So if you'll say, well, he has a mitzvah to become tumah. Okay, so how do we know that one mitzvah is powering over the other prohibition? And how do we know that that's happening? Right? That doesn't normally happen. I'll give you an example. Okay, a Cohen that finds a lost object. Okay, so a Cohen that finds a lost object in a cemetery. He's walking by a cemetery and he sees a wallet sitting on one of the graves. Right, so it doesn't take two and two to realize that somebody must have visited a grave. For some reason, they took out their wallet, they put it down, and then they left. Right, because they thought, why would they ever think that they put their wallet down? So they left. So the Cohen sees the wallet. So to get the wallet, the Cohen has to become tumah. He has to walk into the graves and get the wallet. He doesn't do that. He doesn't go get the wallet. Right, so it's not just that you have a mitzvah and all mitzvahs that the Cohen finds himself involved in. So then all of a sudden, what would he do? He would go become tumah. Right? That's not true. So here, that's what I want to say. That's why when it comes to a Cohen to become tumah, so that the chalos is what drives the Cohen to be allowed to go ahead and become tumah. This new chalos of a Cohen hamisabel, a Cohen that is mourning. That's what I'd like to suggest. And now, okay. What happens with somebody that's executed by the courts? So a guy that's executed by the courts. All of a sudden, what do we say? Nobody mourns for him. What's happening there? Again, I'm not explaining why, right? So let's get that out of our heads. We're not explaining why nobody. I'm asking, how does the halachic process work? What doesn't happen in the case of a person executed by Beis Din, that does happen so much for the Cohen that he becomes tumah. You see the difference, right? You've got like 3 people standing in a line. In the middle person is the regular Jew. He's just a regular Jew. Okay, so I lose somebody, and now I'm going to mourn. I'm the regular Jew. If we shift over to the Cohen, right? So the Cohen now, he becomes an Avel, and he looks at the regular Jew, says, not like you, do I mourn? I don't know. So they say, no, not only do you mourn, but you're going to have to become tumah to mourn, right? It's right. So they say, okay, well, what makes that happen? What did we just share, me and you, right? That says, no, we've both had a chalos. We both had a status added to us. And that's going to dictate what happens now to us. Now you've got the guy who, unfortunately, his relative that died was executed by Beis Din. So he's going to sit there and say, hey, guys, how come I'm not like you? Right? What am I missing? Right? So no, so what happens is that there's no chalos of an Avel that attaches to somebody whose relative was executed by Beis Din. That's what's lacking by him. Okay? So that's the idea. Okay? And that's why the Rambam has this idea of adding in the Cohen, because the Cohen really shows the koach, the strength of this chalos, the halachic strength, okay, of this status that's added on. This status is such a strong status that it even can make the Cohen violate a Torah prohibition of becoming tumah. That's the nature of the status of an Avel, okay. That's a pretty powerful chalos. Okay, good. Okay, now why does the Rambam have to go ahead and explain where he puts this halacha? By the way, I want you to tell you, I don't know of another place. I really don't know of another place in the Mishnah Torah. Okay, I don't know another place in the Mishnah Torah where the Rambam states recognizes that he's placed halachos in a certain place, like where he talks about it. He doesn't talk about it at all. So here, as far as I remember, I could be mistaken, but he even talks about the fact that placing halacha in certain places, it acknowledges that he does that. So very clearly, and he makes he's apologetic about it. So what's the idea? And we asked where would we have thought to put this this halacha? So you could look at the laws of Avielus. Okay, we could see the laws of Avielus as categorized as a personal halacha, like all the halachos in Sefer Ava, the laws of Sefer of Hilchos Kedusha, right? We're talking about the laws of kashrus and the laws of getting married and who you're allowed to get married to and who you're not allowed to get married to, right? Because if you just look at Hilchos Avielus within the context of actions, these are things you do, these are things you're not allowed to do. So then they're personal halachos. They can appear in Hilchos Ava. How do I show my commitment to God when somebody dies? I mourn, right? And it's connected to Hilchos Tefillah because I say Kaddish, right? So I have right. So that's the idea. I mourn. So it's a personal halacha. Okay. It could be in Sefer Mada where it talks about halachos of avodah zarah. They're all halachos of avodah zarah that incorporate mourning, because the idolaters and the pagans used to have all these strange customs when it came to mourning. So maybe we'll put it there, right? So you might think to put those halachos there. And it's not so crazy to think that. But because there's this second aspect of Avielus, of the chalos, it doesn't just apply to the individuals. It's not just Avielus Hayachid. It's not just an individual, but because it has this chalos, it actually affects other different areas. And one of the areas that it affects is in Sefer Shoftim, and the idea of a dayan who sentences, or a Sanhedrin who sentences somebody to death. It's not just, and this is we'd have to go into this area more. It's not just that they're sentencing the person to death, right? It's actually more than that. They're saying that this life that we're ending is not like all other lives that we're ending. Because when all other lives end, it creates a status of Avielus, of the chalos of Avielus. Here, it doesn't create that status. and that's a novelty. And therefore, the Rambam says that's so novel that we're going to stick this in Sefer Shoftim. It's strange. It's not something that you would naturally say, oh, yes, for sure, that's where it goes, right? But that's, I think the Rambam wanted to show something about the one that's executed and the effects of the execution to the extent that it denies a chalos, which is fascinating. That's something to look at another time. Okay. Okay. So now what? So now let's look back, because we're only going to really appreciate, I think, this svara and the answer if we see this inside. If you remember, we were very confused by the way the Rambam listed this in the Sefer HaMitzvos. In the Sefer HaMitzvos, he said the 37th mitzvah is for a Cohen to become tumah for his relatives. And then we wanted to say, wait a minute, hold on a second, that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is, like he says, the zu mitzvahs, who? Mitzvahs Aviel. This is the mitzvah of Aviel. And we said, okay, so then why are you writing it in this strange way? So the Rambam said as follows. He said, hold on. He says, Ulechazek chiyuv zeh ber also b'kohen. In order to show how strong this mitzvah is. And then we said, wait a minute, why does this mitzvah need chizuk? Why does Avielus need strengthening? What are we worried about that people aren't gonna keep Avielus, that all of a sudden it needs strengthening, right? So the Rambam comes along and says, right, it says that we had to put this by the Cohen. Why do we have to put this by the Cohen? Why do we have to write this in the context of the Cohen? So I think our svara shows exactly why. Because the mitzvah is not just the specific actions, like certain actions that we have to do. The mitzvah actually is this status that's attached to the mourner, right? And therefore, where do we see this? Of all places, where is the place that we truly, truly see the chalos, the attachment of this status? We see it by the Cohen, because there the status is so strong it pushes off a Torah prohibition. And therefore, the Rambam says that this mitzvah needs chizuk. I don't know why. Maybe because people that are in mourning are going to have trouble with keeping mitzvos. It's a week in time. They're traumatized. I'm not sure. Right? They're at a vulnerable point in their lives. But in any case, the point is that to show how strong Avielus is, really what you have to show is how it works is in its status. That's the idea. How the status attaches and pushes off the Cohen. Okay. The Rambam now, when challenged by the Kesef Mishna in our next questions, right, when the Kesef Mishna says Aaron didn't even have anything to do with Avielus, right? Aaron was an onaim. So the Rambam's going to explain, no, in Kesef Mishna, what you have to understand is that we're not talking about a specific set of halachos that apply to one person or another. What we're talking about is a chalos here. And the fact that Aaron was talking to Moshe Rabbeinu and saying to Moshe, don't you understand who I am? I'm in mourning. So Moshe Rabbeinu looks at him and says, so what? Right? You have a mitzvah, go eat we're in the middle of the inauguration of the Mishkan. What are you talking about? So what Aaron is saying is, I have a different chalos. I'm not the Kohen Gadol right now. I'm the Kohen Gadol, Shemitz Avel, that is in mourning. Right? It doesn't make a difference if he's in aninus. That doesn't matter right now, right? What matters is the fact that the Kohen Gadol has a different chalos. That's the machlokas between Moshe and Aaron. Is Aaron's new chalos enough to say that he cannot participate in the inauguration of the Mishkan, right? That's what the discussion is all about. So when the Kesef Mishna turns to the Rambam and says, what? This has nothing to do with Avielus. This is all about aninus. So the Rambam is saying, no, it's not about Avielus or aninus. It's about the chalos. It's about the new status that attaches. And that's really the issue here. That's what's happening. And therefore, when the Kesef Mishna's second challenge to the Rambam, now we understand it perfectly. The Kesef Mishna's second challenge to the Rambam said, the Aaron is talking about becoming tumah. The halacha that you're quoting is talking about a Cohen becoming tumah. What does the Kesef Mishna's challenge to the Rambam is, what does that have to do with Avielus? How are you learning anything out from Avielus from that? That's two separate things. And the Rambam's going to say to the Kesef Mishna, how do you think he's allowed to become tumah? What's the mechanism that you think is occurring here that allows him to become tumah? It's the chalos of Avielus. That's what's happening here. And that's why we have to quote it. That's why this whole thing has to be shown. Oh, the whole mitzvah of Avielus has to be shown through the Cohen. That's where you see it. Because where else are you going to see it? Right? Where else are you going to see this so well than in that mitzvah? Okay? So that's the idea. Now, just one last thing. The idea of Avielus of Yaakov of the 7 days, I just wanted to bring this up because it's an interesting thing to note, that all the halachos that occur, this is a Mishnah and Chulin, that all the halachos and mitzvos that we see before Matan Torah, that's not where we learn halachos from. We don't learn bris milah from Avram Avinu. We don't learn the Shiva Yemei Avielus from Yaakov. We don't learn the Gid HaNasha from Yaakov wrestling with the angel. Those are all nice and dandy that the Avos did all those things. But we have a line that says, Nasna Torah, when the Torah was given at Har Sinai, Nischad Shehalacha. All the halachos had to be renewed, which is why in this week's parsha that we just learned, we saw the mitzvah of bris milah repeated, right? Because bris milah is not learned from Avram Avinu, it's learned from this past week's parsha. So when we look at the mitzvah of Avielus, and we look at Yaakov, hey, they mourn for 7 days. So yes, there is a concept of mourning for 7 days, but that's not where the chiyuv comes from. And that's the idea. That's my whole shiur. Okay. I don't know. Okay. Hope you like it.
So
Thank you.
Rabbi, on this is maybe a silly question, but it seems like Rambam could have been a lot more clear in this. Like we're going in circles to try to understand the Rambam of sorts. Like why, and I know you don't like the why question, but why couldn't this just be the mitzvah of Avielus, and then the proof or the category underneath it is the Avielus of the Cohen, he has to become tumah. It still seems like even if the chalos is so important to prove it, it could still be a kind of category underneath, right? Like it still seems like a backwards way to explain what the Rambam's trying to explain.
So I think what the difference is okay. A lot of times we go through something, we have a lot of questions, and then we give an explanation, right? You give a svara, and you're like, okay, so why didn't the Rambam just write that svara, right? That's one confusing thing. Why did you say there's a chalos? Just write that somewhere, right? There's a chalos of Avielus. I don't think that's your real question here. I think what your real question is say that there's a mitzvah asay of Avielus, and then list the details, like the Cohen has to become tumah, and like, okay. So, but the thing is like this, is that if he did that, then you would sit there and say, well, how does the Cohen become tumah? Then you'd say, well, because there's this mechanism of a chalos, right? There's a chalos, and if there's a chalos, so then so that's the mechanism that we follow. So where do you see this chalos, right? If this chalos was really a chalos, then Avielus would have to be listed within the Cohen, because that would be that strong. Then that's what you would see. Where how come Moshe and Aaron weren't talking about this chalos, right? So this way the Rambam is explaining it, and he's saying, look, there's more than meets the eye here, right? I'm going to show you this mitzvah is really all about the chalos. It's really, the mitzvah is really the chalos of Avielus. It's not like other mitzvahs where it's just an action. Here there's right, and in fact, if you would say, okay, so tell me there's one of the 613 mitzvahs is Avielus. So tell me, what's the mitzvah?
Bury your dead.
To what?
Bury your dead.
It's not to bury. No, that's something else completely. That would be likvor, right? To bury your dead. Here it's lisavel. It's to mourn. That's the whole point, right? To mourn is you'd have to go, oh, let's look at, I think it's a parachet of Hilchos Avielus, which is all the halachos of mourning, right? You have to do this, you have to sit low, you have to do that, right? All these things. So really, Avielus, the nature of Avielus is that it's this chalos. And therefore, I think it stems from there. And I think that would be even more confusing to be able to understand if Avielus was listed like everything else. And I think that's that. And I don't like to say that's why God didn't give a posuk, but like I think that's why there's no posuk that you should go ahead and be misavel. You'd expect to see that posuk even at post Yaakov, because you'd expect to find in the Torah a posuk that says you should mourn. Now, a lot of Rishonim look at the fact that there's no posuk to mourn and say there's no posuk to mourn because there's no chiyuv to mourn, right? That's the Avielut, it's our fact that we find. That the French rabbi said that that's why. That's the idea.
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay, B'li Neder, we'll have Shiur next week. I'm very glad that we were back. That was